Adorable golden-haired king bees loved Ying Ying because she had spilled sugar syrup on herself while eating sweets, not knowing if they were mistaking her for food. Ying Ying knew that the bees liked her, so now she threw a tantrum every day, demanding to visit them. Just then, the queen bee emerged from the tree. Ying Ying, who was playing with the bees, turned towards Soryong, started pointing at the tree and with a smile said that the queen bee was there. Soryong sat on the bench and asked Ying Ying not to ask the queen bee to play since she was busy. In response, she closed her eyes and nodded her head. Soryong felt happy thinking that if he had a younger sister, he would feel like this, realizing that taking care of children was not so bad. Ying Ying raised her hand and called his attention, saying that there was another bee. Upon hearing this, our boy's eyes widened in surprise. He brought his hand to his mouth and with a worried gaze asked her to be careful since some bees stung. Just then, she started screaming as she had been stung. Soryong panicked and started running towards her, asking if she was okay. She had a small sting on her arm. With a worried gaze, our boy explained that she should be careful. He decided to leave the matter aside and go first to the medicine hall. Little Ying Ying began to observe the sting, saying that it didn't look so bad. Soryong grabbed her hand and decided to apply some medicine just in case since sometimes bee venom could make people very sick. Ying Ying closed her eyes and with a sad expression nodded her head. Just then, Soryong's eyes widened in surprise. Little by little Ying Ying began to gasp heavily and her face started turning red. She started to feel cold and not long after, she collapsed. Soryong reacted in time, and just before her body could hit the ground, he caught her. His eyes widened in fear as he began to remember what Peng Muwen had said. Sometimes her breathing became difficult, and large red welts appeared on her body, and in more severe cases, she even lost consciousness. Finally, he realized exactly what this reaction was. With a furious gaze, he clenched his teeth upon realizing that the pure reason Ying Ying had been collapsing all this time was due to anaphylactic shock. More precisely, anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction caused by a hyperactive immune response. Usually, when harmful foreign substances or toxins enter the body, the immune system immediately launches an attack to eliminate the threat. When toxins entered the body, they were like thieves entering your house. This causes the cells to run away from the place since the toxins destroy cell membranes. The immune response to these invaders is known as inflammation. The body releases histamine, which dilates blood vessels, allowing white blood cells and antibodies to flood in and neutralize the invader. But the problem arises when the body overreacts to certain harmless substances, widening the vessels even more. When histamine is released in excess and malfunctions due to a hyperactive immune response, the blood vessels throughout the body dilate rapidly, causing a dangerous drop in blood pressure. And since oxygen does not reach the brain and important organs, they stop functioning properly. In extreme cases, anaphylaxis can become lethal. Soryong carried little Ying Ying on his back and with a determined expression, began to run at full speed, knowing that they had no time. He started running quickly through the area, and along the way begged Ying Ying to please hold on a little longer. Several minutes later, thanks to his incredible mobility arts, Soryong arrived at the entrance of the patriarch's residence. With a nervous gaze, he began to shout, informing his father-in-law that Ying Ying had lost consciousness. Upon hearing this, the patriarch opened the door. Ying Ying, who was as red as a tomato, began to pant heavily. Soryong picked up Ying Ying in his arms and clenched his teeth in worry, not knowing if she would be okay. The patriarch and Peng Muwen ran out of the residence, and upon seeing that Ying Ying had lost consciousness, they panicked, asking what had happened. With a worried gaze, Soryong explained that she was having serious trouble breathing. Peng Muwen took his daughter, and his eyes widened in fear. He reached out and decided to pour his internal energy to stabilize her. The patriarch sat beside them and remained silently observing. Little by little, the breathing of little Ying Ying began to stabilize, and the red rashes started to disappear. In a matter of seconds, the red rashes disappeared, and Ying Ying's breathing returned to normal. Seeing this, Soryong closed his eyes, fell on his butt to the ground, and let out a sigh of relief, thinking that internal energy was incredible. The primary treatment for anaphylaxis was to stabilize blood pressure and ensure an open airway for breathing. In modern medicine, this was done using epinephrine, steroids, and antihistamines, and in more severe cases, intubation was required to help with breathing. But in this world, Kai-based techniques solved everything, and it was no surprise that Soryong found it impressive. The patriarch's gaze fixed on Ying Ying, and his eyes filled with seriousness as he realized that the symptoms were the same as last time. He turned to Soryong and, remembering that he was with her, asked if he had seen what had triggered the reaction. Peng Muwen's eyes widened with curiosity. He asked if Soryong knew what had caused her to faint. Our boy sat in front of them and nodded his head, explaining that he had seen it clearly. With a confident expression, Soryang began to show a finger, revealing that Ying had collapsed after being stung by a bee. Upon hearing this, Peng Muwen and the patriarch's jaws dropped in surprise. They could not believe that a bee had been the trigger for the allergic reaction. The patriarch began to stroke his beard and thought that although it was rare, there were cases of people fainting after being stung by a bee. But he knew that this did not explain why she had collapsed all those other times. Peng Muwen's eyes widened in surprise. He thought that the patriarch was right, since if a bee sting were the cause, she would not have made it this far. He was somewhat confused because this meant that they still did not know what the cause was. The patriarch let out a sigh as they could not find any clear connection. But just before he could finish the sentence, Soryang closed his eyes and nodded with a smile, revealing that he had found what the cause was. The patriarch's eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. He was in shock and asked if Soryang was really telling the truth. With a smile, our boy revealed that Ying being stung by a bee had helped him discover the true cause. Peng Muwen's jaw dropped in surprise. He demanded that Soryang explain himself. Our boy decided to explain in detail. Peng Muwen's face filled with sweat, while on the other hand, the patriarch's eyes widened with suspicion. Soryang's attention was fixed on little Ying. He closed his eyes and with a smile mentioned that first they had to remove her clothes. It was already dusk. Someone closed the door of a room. It was Huyen, who turned around and with a sincere gaze admitted that it was just as Soryang had said. Those eruptions on her body made it difficult to see at first, but beneath them there were some old marks, and now new ones had appeared. Behind her were Soryang, who had a bump on his head, the patriarch, and Peng Muwen. The patriarch, who had his arms crossed, began to smile, while on the other side Peng Muwen's eyes widened with happiness, thinking that Soryang was right. Just then, the matriarch opened the door and with a serious gaze asked everyone to remain silent since she had not yet regained consciousness. Upon hearing this, everyone nodded their heads. Peng Muwen brought his fist to his mouth, closed his eyes, and coughed, admitting that it was just as Soryang had mentioned. There were additional marks beyond just the rash. Soryang, who had a giant bump on his head, began observing him in silence. With a sad and confused gaze, Peng Muwen asked why his daughter had been fainting all this time. With a confident tone, Soryang revealed that it was due to bee venom poisoning. Peng Muwen's eyes filled with confusion as he recalled that the patriarch had said that was not the cause. Besides, there was no way they wouldn't notice a bee sting, and their courtyard had no flowers, only stone pavement, so there was no reason for the bees to be there. He wanted to know what made Soryang think it was bee venom. Soryang closed his eyes, started touching his chin, and thought that he was right since a bee sting would have been noticeable. But he had no doubt that her symptoms matched perfectly with anaphylaxis caused by bee venom. Little by little, our boy began to open his eyes, which started to shine. His mind was like a giant bookshelf full of books about poisonous creatures. His eyes began to shine with seriousness. He started touching his cheek and knew that what he needed to find out was another creature that had the same venom as a bee, one that contained melatonin or peptides that triggered swelling and difficulty breathing. He began to imagine the forest of Hebei province in China, which had a temperate western climate. Several poisonous creatures appeared in front of him. Among them was the white-lipped pit viper known as the Chinese cobra, the Chinese scorpion, the Chinese red ant, and the red-chested ant. Soryang began to touch his chin and decided to discard the snakes and scorpions. Peng Muwen's and the patriarch's attention focused on him, and their eyes widened in confusion. They did not know what he was doing. He began to imagine little Ying eating sweets. He had to find an environment where she would often be bitten by that creature, something she did frequently. He remembered that she loved to eat sweets. His eyes widened in surprise as he recalled that Ying had a secret pocket in her clothes to hide sweets. He couldn't help but smile as he found the cause. He stood firm with his decision, mentioning that he was sure it was bee venom, asking them to trust him. Huyen's attention was fixed on our boy, and her eyes filled with confusion. Peng Muwen was somewhat furious and mentioned again that there were no bees in the Peng clan residence. Soryang turned to them and with a confident smile said that those from the Tang clan would know, the venom does not affect everyone in the same way. For some, even an infinitesimal amount could be lethal, while others could withstand 10 times that amount without problems. Peng Muwen's jaw dropped, and he began to sweat without understanding a single word. The patriarch reached out to him and, with a sincere gaze, argued that Soryang was right since even with the same poison, the effects varied from person to person. Soryang extended his hands, explaining that as they had seen, Ying was particularly sensitive to bee venom. Huyen remained silently listening, while on the other side, Peng Muwen and the patriarch nodded their heads. Soryang's eyes began to shine with confidence. He started touching his head with his finger and said that one thing was certain, she was vulnerable to bee venom. But since there were no bees in their house, that only left one possibility. Peng Muwen started to observe our boy and couldn't help but sweat. Somewhere in the manor, the queen bee was lying on the ground with a tender gaze next to another bee. Soryang revealed that the culprit was in fact a bee, but a very special kind. Several hours later night fell. Soryang was crouched on the ground next to some rocks. Huiyin was illuminating the area with a fire lamp, and behind were the patriarchs. The patriarch started to observe our boy with a confused gaze. Peng Muin's eyes expanded with curiosity, and he asked if Soryang was sure that it was here. Soryang's eyes began to shine with confidence. With a smile he said that he was sure this was the place. He asked Huiyin if she could illuminate the area a little. Huiyin's eyes, who was holding the fire lamp, widened with curiosity, and she nodded her head. Soryang left a candy on the ground, and not long after, several small ants emerged from the stones and began to devour the candy. One of the small ants started eating another ant, which began to call for help. Using some chopsticks, Soryang grabbed the ant and with a confident gaze revealed that this guy was the culprit. The attention of Peng Muin and the patriarch was fixed on the ant. They were in shock since this insect was an ant and not a bee. Soryang asked them to look closely since, after all, this ant was a collateral relative of the bees. Peng Muin began to observe the ant carefully, not knowing what Soryang was talking about. Several seconds later, the patriarch's eyes widened in fear, leaving them in shock. The little ant was furious, and upon looking closely they noticed that it had a massive stinger on its backside. They could not believe that an ant had such a large stinger. The patriarch finally realized what Soryang meant by them being collateral relatives, while on the other hand, Peng Muin was left open-mouthed upon seeing an ant with such a large stinger. Soryang began staring at them, revealing that this creature was the collateral relative of the bee that had caused Ying Ying to collapse, a real stinger ant. Peng Muin's gaze fixed on the ant, and he couldn't help but sweat, while on the other hand, the patriarch was in shock. This ant was the true culprit behind Ying Ying's condition, belonging to the order Hymenoptera, family Formicidae, known as the Asian needle ant.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.